The magic of blue eyeshadow. Some might think it's glamorous, others might think it's tacky, but there's no denying that blue eyeshadow is having a moment right now. It's all over your For You page, it's all over the runways, and it's all over Hollywood. And over the past century, the perception of the beauty trend has evolved immensely. From the makeup of Queen Cleopatra herself, to fashion-forward femme fatales, to the tacky next-door neighbor everyone loves to hate. Depending on who's wearing it and when, blue eyeshadow can mean something completely different. Let's get into it. Some of the earliest recorded uses of cosmetics come from ancient Egypt, where both men and women applied colored powders and pastes to their faces as part of their daily routine. They lined their eyes with kohl, rubbed clay on their cheeks as blush, and covered their eyelids with different minerals. Besides highlighting the wearer's beauty and status, these cosmetics also served religious and medical purposes, whether it be warding against evil spirits or protection from the sun's glare. It was during the archaeological discoveries of the 19th century that evidence of these makeup practices were first uncovered, and depictions of ancient Egyptians evolved from the barefaced beauty standard popular in Europe to an aesthetic that was bold and ornate. In 1922, Tutankhamun's tomb was unearthed and contained the single largest collection of Egyptian artifacts to date. The media frenzy that followed the discovery led to a widespread fascination with Egyptian motifs and imagery. Mummies became fixtures of horror novels, scarabs and snakes appeared on bracelets, rich jewel tones were a mainstay in design, and faux hieroglyphs appeared on buildings. Prior to the 1920s, visible makeup had a negative perception, but after World War II, women began rejecting the restrictive fashions of their predecessors, shortening their hemlines and cutting off their hair, and they similarly rebelled when it came to using cosmetics. Technological advances made makeup more compact and easier to use, which gave the average woman more opportunities for experimentation. Silent film stars wore heavy makeup to help their expressions be captured on camera, and many of their fans mimicked that look, with long lashes and dark eyeshadow becoming the norm. Combined with the popularity of Egyptian motifs, blue eyeshadow soon became a popular makeup style, although it was often given an alluring and exotic connotation, with many advertisements of the time period using it in reference to Cleopatra, who was renowned for her beauty. Cultural depictions of Cleopatra had existed for centuries, in art, in theater, and eventually in film, where she was played by several well-known actresses including Theda Bara in the 1910s, Claudette Colbert in the 1930s, Vivien Leigh in the 1940s, and Sophia Loren in the 1950s. With every passing decade came a new depiction of Cleopatra, but what was always consistent was her glamour, beauty, and mystery, making her an aspirational figure to contemporary audiences. It was in 1963 that the best-remembered depiction of the Egyptian queen came about, with Elizabeth Taylor trying the Golden Crown on Versailles. The film's entire production was heavily publicized, in part because of its numerous delays and sizable budget, but mainly because of the scandalous romance between Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton. Taylor did her own makeup for the film, which wasn't particularly unusual for the era, but the final product became the stuff of legend. She had been wearing blue eyeshadow for years to emphasize the color of her eyes, and she carried that preference over to the character. Besides being vaguely historical, Cleopatra's blue eyeshadow also held symbolic meaning. To contemporary audiences, her makeup was on trend, allowing both male and female viewers to see her as a beautiful and influential figure, making Caesar and Mark Antony's infatuation with her not only understandable, but inevitable. Everything about her appearance, from her dresses to her eyeshadow, were hyper-feminine, and that femininity was part of her power. This modern makeup look also hinted at her behavior and motivations, with Cleopatra being depicted as more cunning, ambitious, and assertive than other female rulers in film, personality traits women of the 1960s would find more appealing. Previous depictions of Egyptian characters had used graphic eyeliner and colorful eyeshadow, with the makeup style becoming a shorthand for general exoticism and otherness. But the popularity of the 1963 film made it Cleopatra's calling card, with subsequent depictions following in her colorful footsteps. While many credit Cleopatra for revitalizing interest in blue eyeshadow in the 1960s, it actually had very little impact on its existing popularity, which had been steadily climbing since the 1920s, with brands like Revlon, Maybelline, and Max Factor spending decades pushing the limits of what blue could be, with navy, sky, and electric shades making their way to store shelves. The mod look was heavily influenced by the 1920s, as evidenced by the drop-waisted silhouette and dramatic eye makeup. And several films set in the 1920s were released in response to this interest, like Bugsy Malone, The Boyfriend, The Great Gatsby, and Cabaret. They all featured characters wearing blue eyeshadow, which was far more stylized than it had been in the past, making it clear that they weren't aiming for true accuracy. For these characters, the colorful makeup was a mask for them to hide their true feelings behind, only going barefaced during moments of weakness or vulnerability. It signaled to the audience, as well as the male lead, that there was more to them than meets the eye. Contemporary films presented blue eyeshadow as a subversion of traditional beauty standards, with the look often being a rebellious character's signature. It was both sophisticated and playful, in other words, a contradiction, which the character herself would often be. She'd be magnetic but melancholic, loving but selfish. But much like her sense of style, instead of her eccentricities being a turnoff, they were part of her charm. It was these types of complex characters in A Woman is a Woman and Beyond the Valley of the Dolls that would serve as a point of reference for more recent filmmakers, with Buffalo 66 and Moonrise Kingdom mimicking not only the personas of these cool girls, but styling them in a way that was identical to their moody 1960s counterparts: baby doll dresses, bouffant hairdos, and of course, blue eyeshadow. This character type eventually evolved into what I like to call the pretty psycho, a character who is as evil as she is beautiful. Think Courtney in Jawbreaker, Stephanie in Zola, or Elaine in The Love Witch. Their hyperfemininity puts others under their spell, often with fatal results. But if they'd simply been paying attention, they would have seen the warning signs, with their blue eyeshadow being a stylish red flag. It's a symbol of their fragile emotional and mental state, and the danger that comes with associating with them, similar to how poisonous frogs are bright in color. It was around the 1970s that blue eyeshadow became a symbol of something else: queerness. Films like the Rocky Horror Picture Show and Pink Flamingos used the style as a way of subverting traditional femininity, taking the makeup styles worn by mothers in the 1950s and supermodels in the 1960s and giving it to characters who were on the outs in society. These characters refused to be invisible and dim their sparkle, and their blue eyeshadow became a calling card, a representation of their sexual and gender identity. Blue eyeshadow hit its peak in the 1980s, one of the most colorful decades of the 20th century. Whether you were a teen or a retiree, a supermodel or a secretary, a prep or a punk, chances are you owned a blue eyeshadow. It became a staple in all visual mediums: music videos, movies, pop art. It was so widespread that to this day, if someone is parodying the decade, chances are they'll throw in some blue eyeshadow. In response to the loudness of the 1980s, everything about the 1990s got more minimalistic, with blues and pinks being replaced with beiges and blacks. However, color was still prominent within the LGBTQ+ community, and as a result, blue eyeshadow became a staple in films that explored queer stories, especially those like The Adventures of Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, Hedwig and the Angry Inch, and Velvet Goldmine, which featured characters involved in the performing arts whose looks took notes from queer cultural icons of previous decades like Divine, David Bowie, and Grace Jones. Even blue eyeshadow-wearing characters who weren't explicitly queer have been retroactively adopted by members of the community, with their unusual sense of style amongst more normally dressed characters being considered a subtle indication of their queerness. Because blue eyeshadow was no longer considered trendy in the fashion space, in the 1990s it became a shorthand for female characters who were behind the times. They would be depicted as tacky and trashy, but not in a way that inspired sympathy. Instead, they were rude, vain, selfish, and more often than not, poor. Their blue eyeshadow combined with too tight clothing, neon pink lipstick, giant hair, and unreciprocated flirtatiousness became a shorthand for trailer trash, signaling the negative perception the average person had of the working class. These characters were often the antagonists, bullying an innocent character who had done no wrong. This was likely a reflection of the filmmaker's own experiences with these sorts of people, the bigoted next-door neighbor, or the unfriendly waitress at the local diner. Blue eyeshadow has been predicted as the next big beauty trend, something that isn't too surprising considering the recent popularity of film and TV characters who have worn it, like Maddie in Euphoria or Maxine in X. The film industry has always been influenced by the fashion space and vice versa, and it'll be interesting to see if blue eyeshadow takes over screens again. But this time around, who will be wearing it? glamorous royals, love-struck murderers, or wicked stepmothers. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Bye!